This is week 5, lecture 2. We're essentially going to wrap up our arguments for the existence of God in the book by Grotius by looking at chapters 15 and 16 this week, the moral argument for the existence of God and the religious experience argument for the existence of God. These are less technical and less problematic than some of the other chapters we've looked at, and so I'm hoping that you'll be able to sort of grapple with some of this material easily enough. So he begins with the moral argument, which has a long and varied history. It goes back into Greek philosophical times. He deals primarily with more recent considerations. And the basic idea here is that we all recognize that there are moral distinctions. There's a distinction, as he points out, in the story of the Jewish children who were saved by the Huguenot families over against an Adolf Hitler who would destroy children just as a part of the process of trying to figure out human life. And so he essentially says we can't react if we're socially socialized, and if we are normal people, we cannot react with equanimity. He doesn't use that term, but that's the term that I would use to describe what he's talking about. It has a very good discussion of ethical relativism, and this is something we encounter all the time. At least I do in my teaching and preaching ministry and dealing with outsiders to the church, and oftentimes insiders within the church. What's right for you is what is right for you. What's wrong for you is wrong for you, and I have my own standards. Thank you very much. And he deals with that very, very appropriately. Goes to C.S. Lewis, which I find to be helpful because Lewis has had much of a stake in the moral argument throughout the years of his career. Immanuel Kant also. And notice that these are two very different kinds of people, theologically and philosophically, Lewis and Kant. And yet they both held to the notion that there is a moral reason for adhering to the notion that there is a God. Think about some of the issues that are in the news today. As I give these lectures, there's a big debate taking place on, quote, Black Lives Matter. I just picked that one out of the hat because that one is fresh and current, and probably still will be a few years from now if you're still watching these lectures then. And of course, with the Black Lives Matter people, and I don't want to lump them all together, but many of the most outspoken people are essentially saying something like this. We want to be ethical relativists when it comes to things like abortion and those sort of issues. But when it comes to racism, it's not just that all lives matter equally, it's that Black lives matter the most. And so what Grotius is going to do here is not so much undermine that specific argument as undermine the basis for any argument that cashes in on that particular set of arguments. He talks about on page 339 about how cultural relativism leads to individual relativism. I think he's exactly right here. And notice the counterexamples in 340 and 41 don't really add up to anything when we're dealing with an argument. Obviously, people have preferences, but that's not the moral or philosophical basis for something that we would do. The argument from damnation is something that I think we're all familiar with, especially deep within our own soul. We hear a story on the news about a little girl, 9 years old, who was kidnapped by a neighbor man and was raped and tortured and murdered and buried in a hole in the backyard. If you're like me, and I think we're probably all pretty similar when it comes to this, we want to say, just like Grotius places it here in reference to the 2001 bombing of the Trade Center. He says, well, all of us have the visceral response of damn him for doing that, and damn, there's not a curse word. It's God's response, and so that's something that points to a inner sense of morality that links us to the nature of God. So I commend this chapter. It's really, among all the chapters in this book, one of the most practically helpful just in terms of how you can make use of it right away. This is stuff you could teach if you're a youth pastor and you want to do a study on a specific topic of how we know that God is God and that God is real. You could take this on a series of Wednesday nights, break it down into 5 or 6 or 7 parts, and I think you have a great teaching material both from Scripture and from the various other argumentations he marshals here. Then he has the argument from religious experience. And initially, most of us might have the attitude, well, religious experience is very subjective, and not all religions can be alike, or not all religions are alike, and not all religions can be true, and therefore, how can you account for religious experience? I think that his way of dealing with that is very appropriate, that we sense there's something that's not there in our lives, no matter how wealthy, no matter how healthy, no matter what a wonderful family or marriage or something else we have, we still all have this sort of inner sense that everything is not the way that it should be. And so he talks about that, quoting Augustine, one of Augustine's most famous quotes, Lord, you have made us for yourself. This is on page 367. And our hearts are restless till they rest in you. There's a good Catholic quote if you want to drag one up every now and then. Deals also with Lewis. In Lewis's essay, The Weight of Glory, I would recommend that to you. I believe it's found in his book, God in the Dock. He says that Ecclesiastes is probably the most poignant book in the Bible that points us to the fact that our experiences, no matter how great they are, wealth, human satisfaction on the personal level, whatever, that there's still something not there. And that thing that's not there is the intensity of an experience with the person of God, and that he has created us this sort of way. He talks toward the end of this discussion about the numinous experience, referring to Otto's book, helpful book. We want to encounter something that we can't quite explain in every way. If we could explain it the way we do, the physiology of a pet or something, then it wouldn't be God. And then the transformational experience that throughout the Bible, we have people who have an encounter with God, and that encounter transforms them into different kinds of people. Has a great way of dealing with objections to religious experience arguments. And I think this is overall, these 2 chapters, they're all the chapters in this book are complicated, but these are probably 2 of the chapters that are the most easily accessible. We'll have one more short lecture on the first chapter in the Oliphant book that you'll be accountable for. No quiz this week. We're loaded for that for the week following. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. And God bless you, and I hope your study goes well. Thank you.